The Sand Devil's Hunt, a tale of survival in the Pliocene. The sun hung like a bronze disk in the cloudless sky, baking the East African savanna until the very air shimmered with heat. The leader of the small band wiped the sweat from his heavy brow ridge and squinted across the endless expanse of dried grassland. His calloused feet, toughened by years of walking across stone and thorn, barely registered the scorching sand beneath them. Behind him trudged the remnants of his clan, 6 souls clinging to life in a world that seemed determined to kill them. There were 2 other hunters whose ribs showed stark against their dark skin. 2 women who kept them all alive with their knowledge of roots and berries and which water sources wouldn't poison you. And 1 young one, barely past childhood, carrying the precious firestones wrapped in leaves. They'd been walking for 3 days now, following the ghost of a river that had died sometime during the long, dry season. Somewhere ahead, the leader had promised through gestures and grunts, they'd find water. They had to. Already they'd lost one of the elders to the heat, his body left beneath a scraggly acacia tree because they couldn't spare the energy to bury him properly. One of the women made worried sounds, gesturing at the youngest member who swayed on his feet like a drunk. The boy's eyes were glassy, unfocused. Heat sickness. The leader had seen it before. He pointed with his spear toward a cluster of rocks and a lone acacia tree about a quarter-mile distant. They would rest there, dig for water. It wasn't much of a plan, but it was all they had. They'd barely made it halfway to the rocks when one of the hunters suddenly froze, his hand shooting up in the warning signal all of them knew. Everyone stopped. In the oppressive silence, the leader strained his ears. At first, nothing. Then, a vibration. Not a sound exactly, but a feeling in his feet, in his bones. Like distant thunder, but steady, rhythmic, getting stronger. The leader didn't speak. He was scanning the horizon, every sense alert. In this land, you learned to recognize danger or you died. His people had survived by knowing when to fight and when to run, by reading the signs that other creatures missed. The vibration grew stronger. Then the second hunter pointed, his finger trembling toward the dead tree in the distance. The leader's blood turned to ice water. A lion, a massive male with a dark mane, was stalking a small herd of gazelles. The cats were dangerous, yes, but they were known. You could predict them, avoid them, even drive them off if you had enough hunters and fire. But the lion wasn't what made the leader's stomach clench with primal fear. The sand behind the lion was moving, bulging, erupting. What emerged from the earth was something out of a fever dream, a nightmare given flesh and chitin. It was enormous, longer than 5 men lying head to foot, its segmented body covered in red-orange armor that gleamed like old blood in the harsh sunlight. Dozens of legs, each ending in hooked claws, rippled along its length in hypnotic waves. But it was the head that would haunt the leader's dreams for the rest of his life. Instead of a normal mouth, the creature's face split into a writhing mass of tentacle-like appendages, each lined with curved, transparent fangs that dripped with venom. When it opened this nightmare maw, he could see straight down into a gullet that seemed to lead to hell itself. The clan stood frozen as the massive centipede thing moved with impossible speed for something so large. The lion, alerted by some 6th sense, spun around. For a moment, the king of beasts locked eyes with the monster that had burst from beneath the sands. Then the sand devil struck. Its tentacle jaws shot forward, wrapping around the lion's body like the arms of some demon. The lion roared, a sound of pure rage and terror that echoed across the savannah. It twisted, bit, clawed, its powerful muscles bunching as it fought for its life. But the sand devil's grip was inexorable. Those dozens of legs found purchase, and the creature began to lift the 500-pound cat off the ground as easily as the leader might lift a rabbit. One of the women made urgent sounds and gestures. Run, now, while it's busy. It was the logical choice, the smart choice. Run while the monster fed. But the leader's mind was racing down a different path. He'd lived 40 seasons, ancient by the standards of his people, and he'd lived that long by thinking differently than others, by seeing opportunities where others saw only danger. He shook his head firmly and gestured at the lion, still fighting desperately in the sand devil's grip. Then he touched the ground, made rippling motions with his fingers. The creature hunted by feeling vibrations in the earth. That's why it had come up under the lion. Big animal, heavy footsteps. He pointed at himself, at the others, then made light, careful stepping motions. They could move quietly, stay low. While the monster was busy with the lion, they could take the gazelle it had been hunting. He pointed to where one of the gazelles lay nearby, its neck broken by the lion's earlier attack. Fresh meat, enough to keep them all alive for days. The first hunter shook his head violently, making fearful gestures. Too dangerous. Not worth it. But the leader pointed at the youngest one, already half collapsed from heat sickness. Then he made gestures of death, of starvation. They were dead anyway without food. He locked eyes with each of them in turn, his expression fierce. The lion's roars were weakening now, interspersed with sounds no animal should make. The sand devil's venom was taking effect. The second hunter stepped forward, touching his chest, then the leader's. He would go. He trusted the older man who had taught him to hunt. The leader nodded and quickly used hand signals and scratch diagrams in the sand to outline the plan. They'd split up. Some would create distractions at different points, confuse the creature's senses. The others would grab the meat. If anyone got in trouble, the rest would throw stones, make noise, draw it away. It was insane. But doing nothing was death for certain. They moved like ghosts, staying low, placing their feet carefully. The sand devil was fully occupied with the lion now, its segmented body coiling around the weakening cat. The tentacle jaws pulsed, pumping more venom into its prey. The leader and two others crept toward the dead gazelle. It lay about 30 paces from the feeding monster, close enough that the leader could hear the crunch of breaking bones, smell the copper tang of blood on the hot wind. 20 paces, 15. Behind them, the second hunter picked up a rock, and at the leader's hand signal, hurled it far to the left. It struck a sun-bleached skull with a hollow crack. The sand devil's head whipped around, tentacles spreading like the petals of some grotesque flower. For a heartbeat, it remained still. Then it dropped the lion's limp body and began moving toward the sound, impossibly fast despite its bulk. The leader gestured frantically. Now! They sprinted for the gazelle. Two grabbed the legs while the third supported the body. It was heavier than it looked, maybe 80 pounds of precious protein. But they'd made a mistake. In their desperation, they'd underestimated how sensitive the creature was. The moment their feet hit the ground in a run, the sand devil stopped. Its entire body went rigid. Then it turned toward them. The leader roared a wordless warning. They ran. Behind them, the sand devil surged forward, its dozens of legs churning the sand into a wake of dust. The sound it made was like nothing the leader had ever heard, a hissing, clicking nightmare that seemed to vibrate through his very teeth. The women and the boy were already at the rocks, waving frantically. The second hunter was running parallel to them, trying to draw the monster's attention. He grabbed a rock and threw it at the creature's flank. It bounced harmlessly off the armored segments, but the impact made the sand devil slow, confused. The creature's head swiveled between the two groups, its primitive brain struggling to process multiple threats. The leader shouted and gestured wildly to the second hunter. Again! Keep it confused! More rocks flew. From the rocks, one of the women had found a dry branch and was banging it against stone, creating rhythmic vibrations. The sand devil jerked toward each new sound, unable to focus. The leader and his group reached the rocks just as the monster decided on a target. Then, it came on like a landslide, spraying sand, its maw gaping wide enough to swallow a man whole. One of the women screamed and pointed at a narrow fissure in the rock face. They dove for it, squeezing into the gap just as the sand devil struck. Its tentacle jaws lashed out, one catching the ankle of the first hunter. He screamed as the barbed appendage began to pull him back. Without thinking, the leader grabbed his spear, a simple stick with a fire-hardened point, and drove it into the writhing tentacle. Dark ichor sprayed across his face, burning where it touched. But the tentacle released the hunter, and he scrambled deeper into the crack. The sand devil pressed its bulk against the opening, its legs scrabbling at the rock. The tentacles wormed into the crack, searching blindly for flesh. The clan pressed themselves against the back wall, barely breathing. For what felt like hours, but was probably only minutes, the creature tried to reach them. Its frustrated hisses echoed off the stone. Once, its body slammed against the rocks so hard that dust fell from above, and the leader feared the whole formation might collapse on them. But eventually, inevitably, the sand devil gave up. They heard it withdraw, heard the sound of its legs on sand growing fainter. Through the crack's opening, the leader watched it circle the area once more, then, with a final angry hiss, burrow back into the sand and disappear. For a long time, no one moved. No one made a sound. They simply breathed, grateful to be breathing at all. The leader held up a hand, signaling caution and patience. Maybe the creature was gone. Maybe it was waiting. But they couldn't stay in the crack forever. Slowly, carefully, he emerged. The savannah was empty save for the pathetic remains of the lion, already being picked at by vultures circling above. One by one, the others followed. They'd managed to keep hold of the gazelle through it all, a minor miracle. The first hunter's ankle was swollen and turning purple where the tentacle had gripped him, but he could walk. The leader gestured urgently toward the horizon. They needed to move, put distance between themselves and this place. The creature might come back. They walked until the sun began its descent, finally stopping at another outcropping of rocks. There, they made a small fire and roasted strips of gazelle meat. The smell was divine. As they ate, color returned to the boy's face. Strength flowed back into their limbs. That night, after everyone else had fallen into exhausted sleep, the leader sat watch. One of the women approached him, settling down on a nearby rock. They sat together in comfortable silence, the kind that comes from years of shared survival. She made a gesture, pointing at him, at the day's events, at the sleeping clan. Then she touched her head, made thinking motions. What they had done was clever, dangerous, but clever. The leader nodded slowly. He looked at his hands, hands that could shape stone into tools, that could make fire, that could throw a spear with deadly accuracy. Hands that were weaker than a lion's paws, but somehow more dangerous. He gestured at the lion's remains in the distance, at the place where the sand devil had vanished. Both creatures were stronger, bigger, more terrible. But his people were still here. They had eaten the lion's kill and lived to see another day. He touched his head again, tapped his chest where his heart beat, then gestured to all of them sleeping around the fire. They thought, they planned, they worked together, and they didn't give up. The woman nodded and made a sweeping gesture toward the future, toward distant horizons. Perhaps one day their people would own this world. Perhaps they would be the ones other creatures feared. The leader considered this, though privately he doubted it. How could weak, slow, nearly hairless creatures ever dominate a world filled with monsters? But he made an agreeing gesture anyway. Hope was precious, and his people had little enough of it. The next morning before they left, the leader did something unusual. Using a sharp stone, he etched crude images into the rock face, a long, segmented shape with many legs, a warning for any of their kind who might pass this way. This was dangerous ground, but it was also survivable if you were smart, if you were brave, if you didn't give up. As they walked into the rising sun, leaving the territory of the sand devil behind, the leader felt something stir in his chest. Not quite hope, but close. They'd faced a nightmare and lived. They'd outthought a monster. Maybe, just maybe, the old ones had been right. Maybe one day, their descendants would inherit this savage world. Not because they were the strongest or the fastest or the most terrible, but because they refused to stop thinking, refused to stop trying, refused to surrender. Behind them, the wind slowly began to erase their footprints from the sand, but the warning carved in stone would remain, a testament to the day when a handful of clever apes had outwitted a devil and lived to tell the tale. even if the only ones who would remember were themselves. And perhaps that was enough. The leader took one last look back at the warning he'd carved, at the proof that they had been here, that they had survived. Then he turned his face forward, toward whatever the next day would bring. They walked on, a small band of survivors in an impossibly hostile world. But they walked together, and they walked with purpose. Because they had discovered something that day, something more powerful than fangs, or venom, or armored hide. They had discovered that intelligence, cooperation, and sheer stubborn refusal to quit could triumph over monsters. And in that discovery lay the seeds of everything their species would one day become: the end.